This conference will now be recorded.
Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Can you all hear me? Perfect. Right. Now we'd like to welcome.
Well, good morning. She's taller than I am. Thank you for being here. We've got people online virtually. So we are lucky today to have Wendy Holtzman return. She's our consultant. She's a retired ASU professor. And while she was still an ASU professor, she was going around to communities just like ours and helping them with their long range planning and developing surveys, such as we did this last summer, which would help us define what our priorities would be. So she's here today to give us the results of that survey, and then we'll be talking about next steps. A reminder for everybody that in January, she'll be leading focus groups on some of the main topics that are identified today. And the expectation that she has of the board is that we use the work plan that will be developed as our planning for the future of this community, because it'll have all of your input. And if we did not agree to continue to keep that a living, breathing document, she would not be standing here. So that is the board's commitment, that the results of this study today and also the information that we'll be getting in January from the focus groups of which you will be participating, that we'll be really working on something that will help us for the future. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to dance. Um, how many of you were at my initial town hall? Not all of you. So let me take a moment and explain this why I'm here again. In 2002, a community out in the East Valley, somewhat similar to this community, approached me because I was not looking to necessarily get involved in doing comprehensive long-range planning. And they approached me saying, our facility is 40 years old. We know we can't stay like this forever. If we don't do something now, we're going to be extinct. And I started working with that. And they said, would you come in as an outsider? Because if we look at something internally, we see have rose-colored glasses. The university is the same way. We always have to bring an outsider. Well, they always have to. I am retired. So I started working with them. The older communities, and they realized that what was good when we started has to keep evolving. If we don't keep evolving, then, unlike a squirrel who keeps, feeding itself or saving up for the winter, if we don't keep doing something, anything that we decided 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is just not going to be attractive at all. The other, to future, if we want to bring in future residents, the other thing that you need to remember before I go through any of the results today is that while situations need to remain dynamic, meaning they're going to be changing, They're not going to change overnight. Whenever we talk about planning, we talk about it in phases. So it's not as if something that shows up here is tomorrow going to be totally different. And the third thing is, I share with communities, and I'm very emphatic about this, is I'm brought in as a facilitator to help build community within a community. I'm not brought in to say, this is what you should do, this is what you should do, this is what you should do. You are shaping what the community should do, and I'm helping to facilitate the process of coming to consensus. Okay, so in the process that I've worked with these communities, and actually there's another one, and then Sun City is right, I'm doing this simultaneously, but that's through ASU, a whole different ball game. It's been a major three-step process in that the first step is to gather information from community residents. Everything in the process is voluntary, I should say. No one is being coerced to say you must fill this out or you must do that. But what we found is as we go on further in the processes, more and more people want to get involved because they hear, things. So to take part in the second step or the third step, you don't have to have completed the survey. The survey, also called the needs assessment survey or community survey, looks at a variety of things. And those of you who've completed the survey realize we really do touch on a lot of different topics. The second part, and I'll go into more of this later on when I finish this presentation, is where we meet in focus groups, open to anyone that wants to participate in the focus groups, whether or not you completed the survey. The third piece is the working group, and that's where you as a community, if you've chosen to give us 3 hours of your time in this room, will work out alternatives to the critical points that have risen up through the process. What are the things that Happy Trails needs to work on? Okay, so it is a three-step process. We've completed step one. I'm giving you the results of the survey in totally objective format. I don't live in the community. I don't live in an HOA community. I do understand the communities. So I wanted to share with you something, your results completely objectively, all right, without any filters. So we're going to see how this works because I've been assured it will work. First, we have to put the cover slide back. So for those of you who are not, I'm going to read some of the slides, but also put in some commentary in case you can't see any of the screens up here. Okay, let's go back. There were 785 usable surveys that were completed. By usable, I mean, it means that at least half the survey was completed. It wasn't just someone started it and put in a few things and then stopped doing it. And everyone who did it in paper format, those were usable surveys. There were 33 paper surveys that I entered the data. Exactly the same as the online. So you can see down on the bottom, excuse me, I sent out, because they were requested from residents, 1,560 surveys or links to the survey online, and 752 or 48.2% were completed. It's a decent rate, compared to other communities. We did several callbacks. 752 may seem low to you because of the number of residents that you have, but actually considering that we've done this post-COVID or during COVID, and it's okay. We can get pretty much a generalizable outcome from what we have to present. So here's what we found out about Happy Trails. And you can see in there that while there is always concern in every community, well, why are renters being asked to fill this out? How come they have access to it? 98% of those who filled it out were homeowners. Okay, and I had one landlord. So these are people who live here. So first topic we'll talk about is communication, or how you receive your information from the variety of ways that are used at Happy Trails. Nosy Coyote is your main form of communication or main publication, I gather. And the numbers in blue are, which you'll see throughout, are those, the percentages from those who are less than 65 years old. Okay, so you can see differences, such as more choose to read them online than in paper, as a younger generation. Neighborhood Watch, you can see the difference between online and this whole presentation is on the laptop up there, so it will remain here. You don't have to take notes necessarily. You'll get that as a form somewhere or access to it. But look at the board meetings. 80% rarely or never attend, which might not be so surprising, but only 43% actually read the board minutes. Is that different than other communities? No. It's the same as other communities. Your website use is definitely used. Here's the town hall, and do you know how many people are looking at this electronically? You can tell? 5 or 7 or something, 10? Okay. So 23.2% always or frequently attend town halls. This form of communication during the day may not, this is what other communities have found out, may not be the best way to gather people. Okay, I know that in at least 2 other communities that I've spoken to, they had similar, they didn't have a lot of people attending town halls necessarily, and they decided to switch it to more of an early evening, and then their attendance went up quite a bit in their town halls. Because those who are working, although most of your people are not working, those who are working are able to come, or your daily activities are not happening as much. Again, with the always or frequently, you have good readership for the Friday blasts. I would certainly keep those up. Not so much for the we're listening sessions, but then looking at the board attendance, meetings, this falls in similarly. Obviously, people are coming. If almost 2/3 of the people are coming to pick up printed communication, I would keep that up, right? Bulletin boards, that number around 1/3 is pretty similar in most communities. If you're looking for something specific, you'll go and look at a bulletin board. This is an interesting, these are some interesting results because they are different in a good way, I think, than some other communities I've worked with. We're getting more and more used to cell phone apps. And this first line, would you be in favor of having a cell phone app for your community? When I first started putting that question in with communities, it might have been down around 30%. And now you have almost 2/3 of the people saying, sure, if we have something specific to Happy Trails that we could find out the information on our phones without going through a website, although this information might be similar, we may very well be in favor of that. Okay. Same with electronic bulletin boards, and those are becoming more popular in a number of places. It helps you with the passing through information. You see things and you say, right, that's happening tonight or today. Okay. Whoops, this whole thing didn't come up. Well, I can tell you what it said for willingness. This is strange, it's not showing. Willingness to serve on boards. 10.3% said they would be willing to serve on the board of directors. 29.5% said they'd be willing to serve on standing committees. That's not bad considering you wouldn't want 2,000 people to say they want to be on the board, right? How do we deal with that? But, if you can get 50 people or 40 people saying that they're interested to be on a board, then you know that there are candidates out there. And the same thing for the 30% willing to be on standing committees. There's people out there willing to be part of your leadership of your community. And that's good. That's really good. Right? Ask the question, ways to make the community more attractive. This first line is actually one of this community's hot points. Are we an RV resort or are we a retirement community? And that came up in a number of different open-ended questions. The community needs to determine that. And it probably will be for our working session, one of the hot points too, as to how to work through that. There was also concern, and these are legitimate. They were mentioned in a number of different places in the survey. The first impressions when you're driving along Bell, and I made note of that today as I was driving also, the first impression isn't there. You look at the corner of Cotton and Bell and you have minimal signage. You look at when you come in and it looks old. Enforcement of yard upkeep also fills in that. It's how you look at things. That is no different than any other community. We're concerned about the people who aren't here all the time, don't keep up the yard, even the ones who are here, keep up the yard. What I did get on this, what I did see on this survey, which I haven't seen in other communities, and it's probably because of the timing, is the proliferation of political signs. There's just too many of them. And can we do something to limit that? And can we do something to limit the extraordinary amount of yard art? That came up and up and up, right? The enforcement of CC&Rs is in every HOA everywhere. And you probably, if you've lived in an HOA when you're not here, you get the same thing. It's not easy. Being on the board of directors, I'd like to say it's like the kiss of death because you're never appreciated for doing things like that. But those of you who have served on a board know it is a much unappreciated position, but so necessary in communities, right? All right, let's see. We talked about the most pressing issues. Another one that came up repeatedly is speeding and parking. I mean, it came up in a lot. I didn't notice any when I came in, but apparently this happens quite a bit. People are appreciative of the traffic controls you have, but they're not appreciative of the enforcement of these controls. So speeding, hopefully no one has gotten seriously hurt. Speeding and parking. I want to mention something else about the parking because this came up, it's come up in the past couple of communities. As you get younger residents, and by younger I'm talking like 65 or in 60s, more people have 2 vehicles. And there are a number of communities that only allow 1 vehicle parking at a house. And for people who do go different ways and need 2 vehicles, this is a concern. So it's something that will probably continue to be a concern. And just wanted to make note of that also. Security was also seen as a concern here in that in the past year or 2 years, probably more so a year because during the pandemic there probably wasn't as much. There have been thefts. There has been, people come over walls, coming in through the golf course. It is an open access through the golf course. And it's a concern of residents. And you'll see when I get to the do you feel safe here, you'll see how that is reflected. Right? We mentioned some of these other things. The last item, discussions with the golf course. And I'm not totally familiar with whether there could be discussions at all. I know when I worked with Fountain of the Sun, which was a couple communities ago, they have a similar thing. They have a golf course owned by someone else that's right within their community. And they ultimately have been able to work out things and that they brought someone from the golf course into their major committee structure, into their standing and leadership committees so that they could have further communication. But just wanted you to know through the survey, it's a concern of residents here. Come on. All right, let's look at your programs, facilities, and services, maybe. Those things that were rated high. The cleanliness of the facilities, very nice. Your mail center and service by the activity staff. Those who were 65 and younger added in the variety of classes. That was not as much of an insight by the full community. Also appreciated service by the maintenance staff and information about programs and facilities. The lowest ratings came from your trash dumpsters, information about board policies and actions, but then you have to think, if you're not reading the minutes, okay? And then service by the compliance staff and the recycling. Recycling was brought up a lot. Policies, or that general category and top rating. Happy Trails residents are very pleased to live here. All right, your quality of life as a Happy Trails resident is high. That's as high as I've gotten in other communities. That's a very positive rating, right? And interestingly, even though your dumpster situation is apparently of concern, garbage collection is great, all right? As are quiet hours, parking around your buildings. The parking here is, I mean, I guess I haven't seen it in full times, but I think this is pretty good, all right? You have a variety of facilities that are provided, and while speed limits are posted, they might not be attended to, but they are posted well. Lowest rated, enforcement of speed limits, stop signs, and wearing name badges, which I do see some. Actually, I see a lot of badges here. Come on. We asked questions about the adequacy of traffic controls, and we just sort of spoke about that. Speed limits, you know, they're all in the 2/3 approve of them, but you can see for those who are younger, maybe because they haven't been here as long, they appreciate the yield signs and the stop signs more. This was interesting because in other communities that are stick homes, more of the stick home communities, you know, whether it be the Sun City Grands or the Sun City West, the percentages were not this high at all. I mean, they were well below 50% that, no, we don't think there should be any individuality, don't change any colors, don't do anything like this. But here you have over 2/3 of the people, almost 2/3 of the people saying, yeah, we'd like to show a little more individuality, and we would not mind having some updated color palettes. As far as common ending times, not so much. We'd like there to be, not saying everything has to stop at this hour. And the color palettes and the individuality had a definite increase for the younger residents. Okay, you can move now. What happens if I just click? Nope, didn't like that. Can you move this up at the tower back there? There we go. All right, adequacy of space allocation for clubs. And I only looked at those where at least 40% were familiar. It didn't do any good if, you know, everyone had filled out, don't know, don't know, don't know. So if there was at least 40% familiarity, your facilities, you know, the space allocations were fine for the library and the meeting rooms with the kitchen. The residents did not find them quite so fine for the fitness center and pickleball courts, or the laundry. Let me address the fitness center issue now, because another question related to, did having a fitness center impact on your thoughts about moving to Happy Trails? And that question was inserted because probably 10, 15 years ago, when there weren't as many other fitness centers, the fitness centers in communities were a big thing. And so particularly Venture Out in the East Valley spent quite a bit of money on an awesome fitness center, and their use of it just skyrocketed, so they had to build it bigger. The situation is different now. You have an EOS right at the corner. There's the Silver Sneakers program, which has been around for a while, where, you know, anyone 65 and older, if that goes through your insurance, you have free or very minimal paying costs for joining a facility. So the duplication of services that might be done outside the walls here might not need to be such a concern anymore, particularly since you actually have two that are very close, you know, two large facilities that are very close. So should money necessarily be spent on having an elaborate fitness center within? Probably not. Does it mean you need to keep everything as if it looked in the 1980s? Probably not. Okay. People will continue and for a longer period of time to be involved in fitness activities. It's a big key to, you know, successful aging. Okay. Now the pickleball thing is interesting because pickleball is like one of the most popular activities worldwide now, particularly in this age group. But when I drove past the courts, which I believe are those the pickleball courts as I come in, the blue? Oh, okay. It's like, no one's on those courts. I've never seen anyone. Okay, but there's other courts and they're busy. Okay, got 14. Whoa, would make some communities jealous who don't even have 8. Well, anyway, they're going to remain popular. It just is. This was nice to see in that your name says you are an RV resort, and the members, the residents here appreciate that and feel, yes, we need to keep RV storage and not use the land for anything else. 76%, that's a high percentage. So for now, I mean, and remember, these plans, this comprehensive long-range planning is dynamic. So what might be in 5 years might be different than now. But for now, residents are saying, we want the storage and we want the land to remain as it is, right? Not many take their vehicles out of storage for the summer, and over 70% felt you should not install shade structures. All right, 93% use a personal computer at Happy Trails, right? And only 10% take classes. Does this mean that people aren't interested? No, I think we've reached the point where a lot of people actually know how to use computers now, or know how to get onto YouTube to figure out how to use other types of things. So offering computer classes is probably not as important as it was, you know, even 10 years ago to this age group. Knowing that you probably have a technologically savvy residency here. 98% own a cell phone. It's been interesting to see how this number has gone up over the years because I've asked this question for years. So it's basically almost everybody has a cell phone or a smartphone and home Wi-Fi routers, because not as many use your hotspots. Only about 1/3 use the hotspots. You'll see on the next slide, I think. And 80% have iPads and use iPad or tablets of some sort, right? Now, this next one was interesting, the fitness tracker. Almost 50% and over 60% for the younger ones. So a fitness tracker could be a Fitbit, it could be a smartwatch, it could be something that tells you about your moving around during the day, your exercise, your heart rate, anything like that. The fact that so many people have that indicates that you're not a sedentary population here, and that you need to consider making sure people have access to being able to move and do things. That figure should not be taken lightly at all. In the last community, I should say 5 years ago, that number would probably be around 15% in a 55 plus community. So the fact that it's up near 50%, that's active. That's cool. All right, this is about the hotspots. Only about a third of them use it, but so many of our electronics have satellite, stuff with them. How important is the fitness complex? 38.4% felt it was important, and a third did not feel it made any difference. And we talked about the fact that there's so many options for fitness activities outside of your walls. The duplication internally, duplication is probably not necessary, but augmentation is. All right, finances. We need to spend a moment on this. I'm assuming that many of you were familiar with what happened in Florida with the collapse of the condo because the infrastructure was not kept up, aging facilities. And I mentioned that the reason that I'm even doing any of this is because those who are in the leadership positions in communities felt that our community is aging and we need to do something, right? The reserve fund is the fund that all communities have for making sure that they have care for the future, okay? The fact that less than 10% were familiar or are familiar with what your reserve fund does, it should be a concern to you. Not that they wouldn't be supportive, but that probably need to just do a little better job in communicating what our different funds do. Okay, that's how you can work that through. Although, when I asked about all the different funds, it's still less than 20% are familiar with any of your funds. So having information and transparency about the different funds that you have, what keeps this community going, and that's part of communication, would be something that could be worked on a little harder here, okay? Because when we ask if people do support different types of assessments, there is some support for that. Again, I think that when you offer clarification of why things are happening, and that should we have irrigation breakdowns, should we have our aging water pipes broken down, and we don't have the money for it. I'm not saying you don't have the money for it, because I'm not sure. But if you didn't, work and save money in reserve for the money for it, that's going to shut down a lot of things, right? So those are very important, and even more important now after what we're seeing happening. Actually, there were 2 condos in Florida that were assessed, one with the collapse and another just recently with we've got to evacuate people. Not that you would have to evacuate from homes here, but I think you would feel very stretched should plumbing stop, should, all sorts of things like that, right? So reserve funds are very, very important, and building them up is important. But you have to do that with communication, right? Importance of projects, at least 70, and I looked at those projects where at least 70% considered these projects important. Water and sewer, okay, that's part of your infrastructure. Streets, communication methods, and that would include Wi-Fi and your different telecommunications, and drainage. All infrastructure in some way, projects, all important to community continuance. There were no activities, this is very nice. There were no activities, dues, user fees, or anything where more than 15% of the residents thought the pricing was too high or exorbitant. So you've done a really nice job on pricing for this community. As far as future facility options, you have Chuck Wagon, you have a restaurant here, and that is very strong in the minds of many residents. Now, we put down about future, so it didn't necessarily include the Chuck Wagon now, but having a restaurant and coffee shop within the community, or coffee shop within the community, is still important to a lot of the residents. Shuttle service typically means taking those who do not have the transportation or do not have the means to use their own transportation outside the community to different types of appointments, having that available, or whether it be food shopping or something like that. So at least half the community has an interest in that. That's the highest percentage I've seen in communities I've worked with, right? It doesn't say anything in particular that you're immobile, but people realize that as they age, and if they want to age in place, they may very well need some assistance in getting to other places, right? You can see that the numbers in blue representing those 65 and younger were higher for some of these things. And yes, they put in sports bar and other, those younger. Remember, everything works in phases, or it doesn't have to work at all. Over 3/4 said that no clubs areas were underutilized, yet there were 30 people who mentioned, because I counted them up, there were 30 people who mentioned that billiards is underutilized. Now, 30 out of 752 is not a lot, but the fact that that was specifically mentioned, as well as other people mentioning it to me. What I would suggest, and I'll write this in the plan at the end, it's worked very well in other communities, is that you take the time to do an asset assessment, an asset or use assessment, and during different times during the day, you look at usage, you look at what times, because what times are most popular, because there are some facilities that might be multi-use and might be able to use certain hours for one club and other hours for another, so that you can not have to say no, but you could swap out uses. And you may already be doing that, but it does work. Things that were of top importance: retain the recycling, just make it look different. Have Chuck Wagon, keep going with that. Road replacement, we've mentioned these types of things, before. It just came up different questions. Satisfaction with weekend service. The patrol, 2/3 of the people are satisfied with that. Not so much the office staff. I don't know if your office is kept open. It might be that it's not open on the weekends. Is it kept open? Okay. So it may be that people are like, well, I don't know, I'm not really sure. But those last three are 50% or below 50%. And it may be because they're just, well, yeah, I guess it's okay, but I just don't use it. But they see patrol. This is nice. 82% said they don't plan on selling their homes at all. You want to see that in the community. The typical reasons, excuse me, of why people would leave. Their age, health.
I deserve.
Not unusual. But age, those are typical. 5+.
Take a while to
almost 2/3
really accept that there was more than one bill is capable of giving me.
13% say they do see themselves.
Hard, with child, and you have so much history.
And 18% as maybe year round. So that's another 30-some%. Right? Why did you move to Happy Trails? Affordable home prices and investment property. And investment property does not mean landlord, I need to rent it out. It means for many people, it's our second home. That's what we're implying with investment property. Okay, it was a good investment to have a second home here. 88.3% feel a sense of community and appreciate the friendliness of the people here. Oops, did I? Okay. Now here's the thing, and we spoke about the open access from the golf course and the ease of sometimes coming over perimeter walls. 51.3% said they always feel safe at Happy Trails. That's only half. And 43.6% usually feel safe. So that's still up over 90%. But those were the reasons that were given for why we don't necessarily always feel safe. Too easy to just walk in, unsecure perimeter, and easy to come through the golf course. So I made a note of that when I drove in and said, yeah, I guess it is easy to come in if people chose to come through the golf course. Why aren't you returning to Happy Trails? And there weren't many that weren't returning. They bought a house with fewer HOA rules, need to be closer to family is a reason that happens across the board. Feel there are too many thefts in the past year, and they're bothered by the perimeter insecurity. So it's not, I don't like the people. It's, two of them relate to safety. How'd you learn about Happy Trails? This is like most other communities. It's resident referral and word of mouth. But resident referral is key to, people are already homeowners and they talk to how much they enjoy living here to someone else. They talk about that. It might be wise for those in leadership capacities in the community to provide touch points, to provide some other information, whether it be in packets or something you can download from the website, saying, hey, here's some information you can use to, if you know people who might be interested in moving here. Here's some collateral. Here's something that you can give to them, right? 41.2% convinced others to move to Happy Trails. That's good, right? All right, here's a figure, because when people say to me, well, how can you allow renters? 46.8%, almost 50% rented before they bought. That is not unusual. In some communities, it's higher. It's up closer to 60%. So how many of you were renters? Okay, and you got to use facilities and you got to do things like that, which is why we ask renters if they're interested in filling out surveys too. You want people to test the waters and then feel they like it so much they want to move here. Why would you consider leaving? We talked about these things. It's no different than other places, which is fine, that's good. Community involvement. Just about a third are currently volunteering at Happy Trails, right? That number is probably going to go down as younger residents move in. And let me share with you why. Okay. This is just what happens, right? When those who are in their 70s or mid and upper 70s were in school, volunteering was much more a part of your life. I mean, it was something you just did. Those who are in mid 70s and older are not part of the boomer generation. Those who are now in their mid 50s to lower 70s grew up at a time when the economy was good, and there were lots of opportunities to do things. There was no requirement to volunteer in schools. So volunteering was not part of the lifestyle of most people who were in that boomer age range. Those who are from Gen X and younger, they grew up at a time when volunteering and community service was part of their education. So we have this almost 20-year gap of why should I volunteer? Or what does that do for me? I'm not saying that, I don't want to necessarily say that as you're never going to see volunteers in that age range, but I've done research, in this area, and what I can share with you is that those who are typically within that boomer age range, it's not that they don't volunteer, but they're more specific about the things that they choose to volunteer for. Cause related, short time period, give me the specifics, and sure, I will help with that. But give me something or ask me to do something long range, like work in something every Wednesday morning for on and on and on. It's not of interest. It's not part of their fabric. So what I've been saying to communities for the past 10 years or so, and we'll see this, is 25% said, yeah, with a shorter time commitment, I'd be willing to volunteer. If you can look at the types of things by doing a volunteer asset assessment, or where do we need volunteers, and figure out how things can be repackaged into, there's a beginning and there's an end to this commitment, you are probably much more likely to get volunteers of any kind, right? It's just a different way of looking at things, but it's happening in communities. It's happening in communities across all over the country. It's not just here, right? When people do volunteer, they pretty much start within the first 3 years. And they volunteer, some for your chuck wagon, club and committee officers. I mean, 12.6% who volunteer for club and committee officers, that's a decent number of people, right? Special events, and that number is probably low because I'm sure there are more people who actually said, sure, I'll help out and do different types of things. And that's across communities all over. 13.5% volunteer outside of Happy Trails. That number will increase as younger populations move in. Why do they volunteer? Helping others enjoy the work, enjoy others' company. One of the major characteristics of successful aging is being connected to a community, is being connected to like-minded people, and having a purpose. Having a purpose can't be overstated. Many people that retire, once they retire, if they don't have some way to connect with something, this is going to sound crass, but if they don't have some way to connect with something once they retire, they're dead in 7 years. Research has shown that over and over again. You're here in a community, you came out today, I'm preaching to the choir here because you are not sedentary, folks, but having a purpose is so important, and finding ways to connect people to it is just so important for mental health and social and psychological. It can't be overstated. You can see that even with the younger group, almost a third said they're more likely to volunteer with shorter time commitments. 2/3 said they would rather not pay for services than volunteer. It's probably going to decrease as time goes on. Yeah, I'll pay for that. What they would pay for is food. People said, yeah, I'll pay for food. I'll go to a restaurant. I'll pay for the different food things here. It'll be an interesting statistic to look at. All right. Almost 90% of the non-club members say they feel comfortable in your facilities, right? 67% feel that the space allocated for clubs is sufficiently sized, 2/3 of them. And we talked about that earlier, that some mentioned the fitness center and pickleball courts. No? Okay, come on. Your facilities, and I'm not sure totally what your rental policy is, but most people do not rent out your facilities for private parties, but they are used more so for club parties. Which activities do you engage in? This one sort of surprised me. Walking for pleasure, only 70%. Nationwide, walking is the #1 activity of people, and typically that number is up in the mid-80s. So it may very well be that I'm not sure why. You can see with the younger group, it is up at 86%. I look at the 3 or more times a week as a good indicator because that shows commitment to an activity. So with the general community, it's 45%, and with those who are younger than 65, it's up at 60%. You have a lot of areas to walk here. Right? That is plenty. Sitting by the pool, now this might be a reflection of the fact that people felt the pool area needed upgrading. But sitting by the pool is 42, or people realize I shouldn't just sit by a pool because the sun's rays are not good for me. But the younger people don't seem to realize that because 75% of them said they do that. All right. And the pickleball only came up with the lower than 65 years of age, and 30% said they do it 3 times a week. Program participation, theater outings up around 40%, bingo, exercise classes, and bus trips. So a third of the people, you wouldn't want everyone going to them, but that's a healthy percentage. That's very nice. Okay. Engagement in your events do get attendees. And I'm assuming you do see this, that your events get attendees, all right? I mean, when you get almost half the people saying, yeah, I go to these events, that's very good. Keep on doing them. Events bring socialization. You know, it also allows people who like to volunteer and hook up in some other way to have some opportunity to do so. Okay. Interesting that vendor sales in all communities I've worked with have been high, so keep them coming. The main reason residents do not participate in more activities at Happy Trails is time constraints. That is all over the place. I mean, that's with every age group. I don't have the time. Now, whether that means I don't have the time because I'm busy in other things that are active, or I don't want to make the time, or I don't have the time because I'm live streaming or I'm streaming my favorite shows on my TV and I don't want to get out of the house. I didn't ask that question, but time constraints is that's the main reason. It's not financial, it's time constraints. 2/3 of those completing the survey felt that more activities should be provided for residents with limited mobility who are not homebound. Okay. If these activities were offered, and we mentioned a number of activities, would you be likely to participate in them occasionally or often? Concerts, yes. And about, at least 1/3 of the residents said yes on cooking classes, fitness classes, lifelong learning, and wellness programs. It gives you some idea of where you might put some energies in the future. But definitely 2/3 concerts. All right. And then just finally, this is who filled out the survey. A little more than half were females. 84% have a spouse. Many lived here for, well, let's see, a little less than half or 1 to 5 years, but there were still a lot that lived here more than 11 years. Okay. 89% completed the income question, even though people said, I'm not going to put down, why should you have that on a survey? 89% of the people, it doesn't surprise me anymore, actually, though, because I know most people will put it down because I'm giving you the data aggregated. You can't bring it back to anybody. So over 60% of your residents have an income of $45,000 or more. The reason I bring this up is because it gives you some idea of whether or not assessments of any kind will fly in a community. 90% or so are not employed while living at Happy Trails. So they're here. It doesn't mean that they're not busy. It just means that they're not leaving. And we asked, are you employed part-time or whatever? No, 90% are not employed. The amount of months spent in the home state and province, a quarter of those who filled out the survey are 10 to 12 months. Right? But we did see that there are a number who said that they would consider being full-timers, having this as their main residence, I should say. A little over 1/3 or 5 to 6 months, So you can see where those percentages lie. 40% of Arizona as their home residence. And then you're drawing from the Pacific Northwest as your next largest area, followed by the Rocky Mountain states, Great Plains states, and this has 3% from Canada, but I'm sensing that you may have a higher Canadian residency than most of these communities do. Some as high as 20-some%. All right, so let me just pick up a few things in summary. I wrote down a few of the points. Electric and printed information works in this community. Both of them work, but notably, if you want to send stuff out electronically, it will reach residents in the community. This community is computer literate. I would vary your methods of information distribution so that you are reaching a wide variety of residents. Right? There are some pressing issues. Your mission, speeding, infrastructure, restaurant, yes, no, outsourced, insourced, volunteer, whatever. The appearance of lots and communication with the golf course or communication collaboration with the golf course. Your residents absolutely appreciate the facilities here and the variety that are offered. Compliance is an issue, compliance is an issue, but it's an issue everywhere in every HOA, whether it's a 55+ community or not. There are always going to be some who feel that someone's not working hard enough to make sure that everyone looks the same. That's always going to be an issue. Residents feel they have a very high quality of life here. And that's a definite plus, which implies that that has not always been the concern with some of these communities. It definitely hasn't been. It implies that your issues, your critical issues that you're going to work on are going to be more of the non-personal issues. It's not as if we have to worry about angry people and this and that, which some communities have had to deal with. How do we deal with those who are so vocal against our community? That's not going to be an issue here. You have some other things that are workable that will come up for the working groups. People are in favor and will continue to be for more individuality. It doesn't mean that you have to allow every blue building in. It means this is something to look at, right? And residents don't feel they've outgrown the facilities. They do feel they would like to keep RV options here at the community. Fitness facilities, while they are available, are not the primary focus within the community as they might be in some other communities, because you have easy access outside the community. Very easy access here. From my perspective, there should be some concern about knowledge of your different funds. Okay, it's correctable. I mean, you can deal with that. You can work that out. There is support for adding more money to different areas. You just have to work out how's the best way to go about that. There is support for remodeling. Pool, chuck wagon, town center, right? Those points aren't necessarily. Residents are staying here. And because they're staying here, then there needs to be some action, to work on these. If you had people coming and going and coming and going and coming and going, it's a lot harder. But the fact that residents are staying here, they want this to be a community, not just a place, to go to. They moved here because it was affordable, which is a two-sided coin. Do we look like we're so affordable that just anyone will move here and not listen to our, CC&Rs? Or is it good that we're affordable because we're able to attract a group of like-minded people who feel comfortable living here, and this is within their means? and it is a second home for many people, so that's an investment. Safety is a concern. All right. Volunteering could increase with shorter commitments, restructuring that. All right. And continue with your events. They attract your residents. They're a way to bring people together. They make people feel good. They also give you opportunities to cross-promote other things you're doing. Time constraints, as we talked about, can mean that they're active in other things, or they just don't care to make time for something. I like to believe it's they're active in other things. And you might have to adjust times when things are offered if you want to get more people out to, certain things. So that summarizes it. You're going to get a copy of all this. You can peruse it in more detail should you choose to. Here's how the next step works. I think, Barbara, did we just say in January that the folks, okay, you'll get some communication out soon that in January, we're going to hold focus groups. Every focus group is going to be asked the same questions. You'll get the questions when you come to the focus group. They're more, it's like 2 or 3 questions that happen for each focus group, but they're things that will help give more information about the general community. Each focus group lasts for about 45 minutes. All the focus groups are as homogeneous as they can be, meaning that those who are residents 1 to 5 years are not going to be in with folks who've lived here for 15 or more years, right? Because focus groups should be made up of homogeneous, people who have similar perspectives coming into it. Anyone who wants to sign up, and we'll work out the sign-up procedures, but typically we've had people just sign, they send an email, or they're going to sign it. You can sign up at an office somewhere. We'll work out the specific procedures. I get all the information. I break people into, because we're going to ask you, your name, your contact information, whether it's over an email, how many years you've lived here, and if you're a US or a Canadian resident. Okay, because Canadian residents have different constraints that they need to deal with coming to the US. And then I will contact people to let them know when their focus group will be, so that we can work on homogeneity of each focus group. All of that, I'll generally stay here for do 4 of them back to back. After 4, I get pretty burned out in a day. So you'll get 4 of them back to back. I'll get 4 of them back to back, and we'll do it a couple of days. I imagine in this size community, we'll probably have about 12 different focus groups, maybe 12 to 14 focus groups that happen. All that's done in January. And then from the results, we'll come up with a result of the survey. We'll come up with anywhere between 6 and 8, might be closer to 6 points or critical issues, or whatever the terminology is. And this room will be turned into a working group session where we'll bring out the rounds and 10 to a table or 8 to a table, depending on the size of your rounds, round tables. And you'll be asked to sign up. This is a sign up thing. You'll be asked to sign up. You'll know what the issues are beforehand. You'll be asked to sign up at an office. You have to give 3-hour commitment for this, okay? The first 2 hours are working on the different issues. I'll explain that more in a moment. The last is presentations. And this is where we'd want it filmed too, for those who couldn't attend. The presentations we'd want filmed. We don't have to watch people working at a table. On the different tables will be a table tent that has, let's say communication was one of our issues. I'm just saying that, or security, whatever. There'll be a table tent, and it's on the table, and along with it is information that was relating to that issue from the survey, from the focus groups, from whatever, and it'll be there for those who sit at that table. You'll sit at a table, you'll choose where you want to sit. You're going to get three different tables to sit at over the course of 2 hours, okay? 3 different things to address. So you'll sit at that table, people will look over the information, you'll have big paper, you will write down, usually with bullets, solutions, things to look at, alternatives, just points relating to that. And then when the time is up, and you'll work as a group. This is where we want people to leave their personal agendas at home, please, because this is for the community. Then you will move to another table of your choice for another 15 minutes or so and add on to the list, not duplicating, what was up there, so you kept time to look and see what the other points were, because the big sheets will remain at the tables. And then you'll get a third group that you can move to. Although if I see people really, really engaged in the first one, you may spend half an hour there. Well, we play that we just figure it out when it happens. And then the last hour are the presentations for each group. Now, ideally, it would be nice to have someone sit at each table that didn't move so that they could be the coordinator of that table. And we'll work out those details. In other communities, sometimes I've had a board member sit there, but then again, there are people who say, I'm not going to say these types of things because the board member is going to pinpoint me for whatever. So we'll figure out how we might run that for this community. After that, after the working group has worked, and people generally are really energized by that, because we can also identify people who get involved well and suggest to them that, you might think about getting on such and such a committee or running for the board or this or that. And I have had people come up, email me afterwards saying, I never considered myself that much of a leader, but boy, did I like doing this. And then they've wound up, moving into leadership positions. So after that, I take all of this and I work it into a final report, which I give to Happy Trails. This is going to be sometime in the spring. I give it to Happy Trails. My requirement is that every resident has access to it. It's not just I give it to the board, so it gets posted on your website, okay, with access so you can download it. In it is the review of everything we've talked about here, insights from the focus groups, insights, all the stuff from the working groups, and then potential ways to work through your critical issues. In the back of it, I give access to, I include the latest data trend, the latest trend reports about those who are in the 60-some plus age group that comes out from Transamerica reports, from AARP, from a variety of things in Canada. I mean, this comes out regularly, and I include all of that information too, so that you can have, as a community, not have to search for that. You have all of that information yourself. It's quite helpful. There's some really good stuff that's come out from the larger organizations doing the research that you might find. I also talk in the report about prioritization and how to work through phases and stuff like that. The development of a strategic plan with the goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. So all of that's included in there. But it can only happen when I get input from community members. Okay? So it's not as if I have this already done. It's no, I'm taking the data and working it through that way. So at that, are there any questions? There don't have to be. Yes. You gave me that. It's 2,000 some. I have that number at home. What is the number? It's under 5,000. Any other questions? Yes.
Have we done a reserve study for the community?
Has the community done a reserve study? Yes.
So we have a current reserve study right now.
Which is good. Because let me tell you, there's some that have not. And starting from scratch on that is challenging.
We did have one question online in the chats. The
Uh-huh.
question was for the breakout groups. Will it be done in the evenings or the weekends for folks that are working?
I will make sure I have some in the evening.
Okay,
Yes,
wonderful.
no weekends, but I will make sure I have some in the evening for those who are working. Absolutely. And I've done that before and we've had really good attendance.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Not a problem. So the next thing you're going to look, and the information will come out in December. You're going to look for signups for when we work out the procedure for the focus groups, so that I can get those organized. We can start at the beginning of the new year in January, and get that going. And it's no more than 45 minutes of your time to do that. And they'll be in small rooms because there's generally not more than 12 people in a focus group. Focus groups should not be large. They should be small so that people can talk. Thank you all for coming out today. Enjoy the rest of your day.